Hello, I'm your dragon writer, Ricardo Chévere, author of Dragons, a fantasy adventure novel about the ever-raging war between human mages and the dragons of the world. I have been asking you over and over again to go get a copy of my books, read them, enjoy them, and then of course, review them. But why would you want to spend your money on something you don't even know what it's about? Well, let's fix that today. I am going to start reading to you the very first chapter of the very first book of the series, Dragons, the Essential Ties. So, let's begin the adventure. Chapter 1, A Frightening Night. Boris! Boris! Called out Ivan Masanova, a thin and tall middle-aged man with some gray hairs already showing around and above his ears. With the frown and forehead wrinkles of someone who had worked hard all of his life, he stopped for a moment to catch his breath. He had been walking up a hill in the Skala slopes of Poland, where the impressive stone city laid, filled with rock formations that looked as if Mother Nature had sculpted them into the magnificent figures they looked like: people, animals, even trees and artifacts. Just a few days before, he remembered, he had had a serious conversation with his 8-year-old son about his escapades to the Stone City. Boris, you know it's not safe, said the father to his son with a concerned and loving tone. I don't want you going up there to that place alone anymore. But I like to talk to the rocks. They are my friends. Listen. Suddenly his father's facial expression turned from concerned to worried, and then to sad as he sighed. Someone or something is out there taking your friends away. Boris was about to open his little mouth to talk again, but his father continued right before he had the chance to say anything. And I don't mean your rock friends. The children are disappearing, and I don't want you to be the next one. I could not bear the pain. He then looked at Boris, straight into his big, blue, round eyes, holding him on his lap, and said, Promise me that you will not go to the rocks again by yourself. I promise, Boris replied quickly. As the sun was coming down the horizon on the Stone City, Ivan's calls for his son became louder and more desperate. Boris had broken his promise. Unknown to his father, though, was the fact that he had gone down the hill through another one of the many passages he had learned about from his many visits to the Stone City forest before. It was at night that the children had been disappearing, and Ivan's thought of losing his one and only son was creeping up his spine like a cold chill. Although now short of breath, he kept running up the hill, desperately looking around. His fear was growing, and the landscape was not helping, for in each rock formation he could recognize figures, animals, even human forms that looked as if they were accomplices to the terrible fate that awaited the kidnapped children. He stopped. He had to stop and put his hands on his knees to catch his breath. His old lungs couldn't bear the demand for air that this strenuous run put on them. The forest was getting darker by the minute. The sun had been swallowed by the horizon, and only the remains of its light allowed Ivan to barely see. Suddenly, something moved in the distance, somewhere approximately 20 to 25 meters away. "Boris!" he yelled, with a renewed hope in his voice. "Boris, is that you, my son?" He kept negotiating the branches of the forest floor, the knee-high rocks, and the creeping darkness. He came to what looked like the place where he saw something move. He stopped, lit the old oil lamp that he had brought, and looked around. He called Boris again, but there was no response. Tired and breathless, he sat down on a rock, thinking only the worst, as tears started to run down his cheeks. Then he heard a sound, like when horses breathe out, but stronger, louder. A big rock formation started to move, and he could clearly hear the sound of crumbling stones. He stood up quickly, with his lamp in his hand, but he fell to the ground because of a tree branch that toppled him. He looked up in terror from the forest floor as the rock stretched out with what looked like arms. Then a head on a long neck stretched out as well from the rock, and he heard the breath, like winded horses, again. Ivan, a devout Christian, couldn't move his legs, but he could certainly still gather enough of his breath to say a quick prayer with his eyes tightly shut. "Boris is fine," Ivan heard a strong and very potent voice say, combined with a growling sound. He stopped his prayer and opened his eyes to find himself in front of a dragon. With his trembling hands, he covered his face as he whimpered in fear, turning his body and making himself into a ball. Then again, he heard the breath come out from the nostrils of the dragon, and the same words repeated. "Boris is fine." He finally took his trembling hands off his face and looked at the dragon with a wondering expression, as if waiting to confirm that the same dragon that was about to eat him was the same one talking about his son. "My son, Boris, you know my son?" he asked in disbelief, and in fear of what that could mean. "Yes," replied the dragon. "You leave him alone," the man yelled. "Don't eat him! Take me instead!" Each new phrase came out with a surprisingly new strength. Ivan was still afraid, but the thought of a child-eating dragon knowing his son's name made him forget about his own safety. "Eat him? You must be out of your mind," the dragon growled, sounding disgusted. "I do not eat humans, you ignorant fool! I protect them!" The dragon was sounding more and more irritated each time Ivan spoke. "If not for my presence in this village, all the children would be dead already." But Ivan was not listening. His mind was focused on one thought alone. How did the dragon know his son's name? The dragon, which was looking with certain anger in his eyes, suddenly raised its head and ears, as if listening for something up in the sky that it could not see. Then, still looking around and trying to pinpoint the location of that something it seemed to hear, it said to the man on the floor, "Go! Quickly! Run as fast as you can and lock yourself in your house." "But, my son, I already told you." Now the dragon sounded really angry while shouting and growling. "He is fine. He is already at home. Now go!" The dragon then opened a huge pair of wings and flapped them to get off the ground and fly. Ivan started running down the hill, but stopped to try and recognize a peculiar sound. He heard it again, but this time it made him run even faster. The sound was like a bird, like a screaming bird, but with a hint of a human's voice in it. It sounded as if it were coming from the distance, but from different sides, as if circling above in the evening sky. Ivan also heard a loud, angry roar he could recognize. It was the dragon's roar. This is only a little bit of the first chapter of the first book of the series, Dragons, the Essential Ties. I will read more for you in part 2 of this video. May you fly on the wings of dragons.